Marry me. Nina Brooks placed a cheap silver ring in front of Vincent Beaumont. And for the first time that evening, the most feared man in Louisiana looked startled. The silver lighter in his hand snapped shut with a hard click that cut through the dining hall. Around them, senators, judges, and wealthy donors fell silent one by one, watching the black maid standing beside the long crystal-covered table as if she had just walked into church carrying gasoline. Vincent stared at the ring for 2 full seconds before lifting his eyes to her face. "What did you just say?" Nina kept her hands steady even while her heartbeat turned uneven beneath her ribs. "I said marry me." A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere farther down the table, but it died quickly when Vincent glanced in that direction. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. "Everybody out," he said. Chairs moved immediately. Guests gathered their coats and drinks without looking directly at either of them. The jazz music from the ballroom outside continued softly while the dining hall emptied until only Nina and Vincent remained beneath the chandelier light and the sound of rain hitting the tall windows overlooking Lake Pontchartrain. Vincent picked up the ring between 2 fingers. Cheap, silver. Small fake stone. Nothing about it belonged near a man like him. "You interrupted my dinner with half the state senate," he said calmly, "to propose to me with a $5 ring. I paid 7. That almost pulled a smile from him. Almost. Then his face hardened again. "Explain." Nina swallowed once. "Somebody's trying to kill me." The room changed after that. Vincent leaned back slightly in his chair, watching her with sharper attention now. At 40, Vincent Beaumont had the kind of face newspapers trusted and enemies feared. White. Controlled. Expensive suit without a tie. Dark eyes that rarely revealed more than calculation. Nina had worked inside Beaumont Estate for nearly a year and had never once seen him surprised until she placed that ring in front of him. "Who wants you dead?" he asked. "I don't know yet. That's inconvenient." "I know." He rolled the lighter once through his fingers. "Then why come to me?" "Because whoever's after me works around your docks." That got his attention. 3 nights earlier, Nina had been cleaning the east corridor outside Beaumont Estate's private library when she heard 2 men arguing behind the closed doors. One voice belonged to a security supervisor from Beaumont Shipping. The other she didn't recognize. They were talking about a witness, federal investigators, and somebody who needed to disappear before morning. Then one of them mentioned her father's name. Daniel Brooks. Nina looked at Vincent now and said it aloud. "My father used to work at the port." Vincent's expression shifted slightly. "Daniel Brooks? You remember him?" "I remember everybody who died working for me." The answer landed heavily between them. "My father didn't die for you," Nina said quietly. Vincent studied her face for a moment before asking, "How long ago?" 3 years. "The warehouse fire." "That's the official version." Thunder rolled across the lake outside. Vincent stood and walked toward the windows with slow, measured steps. Even from behind, he carried the kind of presence that made people straighten instinctively when he entered rooms. Nina hated that fear and safety seemed to exist so close together around him. "You think your father's death connects to my business," he said. "I think powerful men hide ugly things behind expensive walls. And you believe marrying me solves that?" Nina reached into her apron pocket and handed him a folded photograph. Vincent opened it carefully. Red spray paint covered the front door of her apartment building. "Stop asking questions." "My brakes failed this morning," Nina said. "Tonight someone followed me from work." "Police?" "My father trusted police officers before he died." Vincent looked at the photograph another moment before placing it beside his untouched whiskey glass. "So your plan was to walk into my dinner and ask for my last name." "My plan was survival." He looked back at the ring. "You really think becoming my wife would protect you?" "I think people hesitate before attacking something that belongs to Vincent Beaumont." The silence after that felt heavier than before. Vincent moved closer until only the table separated them. Nina caught the scent of cedar and whiskey beneath the rain drifting through the cracked balcony doors. "You understand what people say about me?" he asked. "Yes. And you still came here. You're not the only dangerous man in Louisiana." Something dark flickered briefly across his face, then disappeared. Vincent opened the lighter again. Click. The small flame reflected in his eyes while he studied her carefully, like he was trying to understand whether she was brave or desperate enough to become a problem. "Where did you buy this ring?" he asked. "The hotel gift shop downstairs." That finally made him exhale through his nose in something close to disbelief. "This may be the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only one I had time for." Before he could answer, the dining hall doors burst open. A security guard hurried inside, breathing hard enough to tell them something had already gone wrong. "Mr. Beaumont," the man said quickly, "there's been an explosion downtown." Nina felt her stomach tighten immediately. Vincent's expression stayed calm. "Where?" The guard hesitated after noticing Nina standing there. Dauphine Street Apartments. Her apartment building. For a second, the room tilted beneath her feet. Vincent noticed instantly. His eyes moved from her face to the cheap silver ring still sitting on the table between them. The lighter snapped shut one last time. Then Vincent asked quietly, "Did you know your apartment was going to explode tonight?" "No." His gaze stayed on her another second before he reached for his coat. "Good," he said. "That means they expected you to be inside." Vincent drove himself. That surprised Nina more than the explosion. Men like Vincent Beaumont usually sat in the back seat, while somebody else handled roads, guns, and consequences. Instead, he walked through the underground garage beneath Beaumont Estate, tossed her into the passenger side of a black Escalade, and pulled out into the rain without waiting for security backup. New Orleans blurred past the windshield in streaks of golden water. Jazz bars still glowed along Bourbon Street. Neon signs reflected across flooded pavement. Somewhere downtown, sirens screamed through the storm. Nina sat stiffly beside him, hands locked together so tightly her fingers hurt. "You don't have to come with me," she said quietly. "Yes, I do. You barely know me." Vincent kept his eyes on the road. "Somebody blew up your apartment an hour after you asked for my protection. That makes it my business now." The answer should have comforted her. Instead, it made her uneasy in a different way. Vincent spoke about danger the same way accountants spoke about taxes. Calmly. Inevitably. Rain hammered harder against the windshield. Nina glanced sideways at him. "Do you always involve yourself this quickly?" "I usually involve myself earlier." That almost sounded honest. The closer they got to Dauphine Street, the heavier traffic became. Police cruisers blocked intersections while firefighters moved behind walls of smoke and flashing red lights. Vincent slowed near the barricade, rolled down his window, and showed his face before the officer even reached the SUV. The policeman immediately stepped back. "Mr. Beaumont." Vincent nodded once. "Let us through. No argument. No questions." The barricade opened. Nina noticed that. People obeyed Vincent before he raised his voice because they already understood what happened to people who didn't. Her apartment building looked worse than she imagined. Half the upper floor had collapsed inward. Smoke drifted into the wet Louisiana night, while tenants stood barefoot beneath umbrellas and police blankets. A woman cried near the curb. Somebody else shouted about a gas leak. Nina stared at the broken windows of what used to be her home. Everything she owned was somewhere inside that smoke. Vincent stepped beside her. "Stay close." She almost snapped back that she could stand alone. But then she saw two men near the ambulance line watching her too carefully. Not neighbors, not firefighters. One reached for his phone the second she arrived. Vincent noticed them too. His expression changed almost invisibly. "Get back in the car," he said. "What?" "Now." The tone ended the conversation before it started. Nina obeyed. Vincent remained outside another minute, speaking quietly into his phone while rain soaked the shoulders of his black coat. One black SUV turned onto the street. Then another. Men stepped out wearing dark jackets and earpieces, spreading naturally through the crowd without attracting attention. By the time Vincent climbed back into the Escalade, the two men near the ambulance line were gone. "You saw them," Nina said. "Yes." "Who were they?" "Not police." "That doesn't answer the question." Vincent started the engine again. "You're still alive. Focus on that first." They drove in silence for several blocks before Nina finally asked the question sitting like broken glass inside her chest. "Did my father work for you?" Vincent rested one hand on the steering wheel. "Everybody at the port worked for me one way or another." "That's not what I asked." "No," he admitted. "It isn't." Lightning flashed over the Mississippi River as they crossed toward the quieter part of the city. Old Southern homes stood behind iron fences and wet oak trees heavy with Spanish moss. Nina watched the rain slide across the passenger window and remembered her father coming home smelling like dock water and engine oil when she was 12 years old. He used to tell her that ports were cities inside cities. Money entered quietly there. So did dangerous people. "He wasn't a criminal," she said. Vincent glanced at her briefly. "I know. You say that too fast." Because your father spent 2 years refusing bribes from men who earned more money in 1 week than most people in Louisiana earn in 10 years. That pulled her attention toward him immediately. You knew him personally? Yes. Then tell me why he died. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. Not tonight. Anger rose faster than fear now. You don't get to drag me into your car and then decide what I deserve to know. The Escalade slowed at a red light. Vincent looked at her fully for the first time since leaving the explosion. You think tonight is about information, he said quietly. It isn't. Tonight is about whether somebody tries again before sunrise. The light turned green. He drove on. 20 minutes later, the SUV rolled through iron gates taller than Nina's apartment building. Beaumont Estate appeared through the rain beyond rows of oak trees wrapped in pale garden lights. The mansion looked less like a home at night and more like a private government building wealthy enough to ignore laws. Nina stared at it silently. You live here alone? She asked. Not exactly. As if summoned by the answer, the front doors opened before they even reached the entrance. An older black woman stood waiting beneath the chandelier light inside the foyer, arms folded tightly across a flowered apron. There he is, she said sharply the second Vincent entered. Walking around New Orleans during a storm like the Lord stopped making bullets. Vincent removed his wet coat calmly. Good evening, Ruth. It is not a good evening. One of your guards called me crying and said there was an explosion. He exaggerates. Mama Ruth's eyes moved immediately to Nina. Concern replaced irritation so quickly it almost hurt to witness. Oh, honey. That nearly broke Nina apart right there in the foyer. Not because of fear, because nobody had spoken to her gently since the explosion. If Nina's pain touched your heart, please give this video a like. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Your city, your state, or even your country. Who knows? Someone living near you might be watching this same story right now, feeling the very same thing. If you're listening right now, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional crime stories filled with secrets, loyalty, and hidden truths, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Mama Ruth crossed the marble floor and took Nina's cold hands without hesitation. You hurt? No, Mom. You eaten? Nina blinked once. I don't remember. Of course you don't. Mama Ruth shot Vincent an annoyed look. That man would forget food exists if nobody raised him properly. A younger man appeared from the hallway carrying a medical kit and 2 paper bags from a late-night diner. Early 30s. Broad shoulders. Smart mouth already visible in his expression. Elijah, Vincent said. Check the perimeter. Elijah handed over the food first. You know, normal rich people spend evenings golfing. Maybe buying boats. You keep collecting traumatized strangers. Nina almost smiled despite herself. Vincent looked unimpressed. Perimeter. Yes, sir. God forbid we enjoy conversation in this family. Mama Ruth pointed toward the staircase. Second floor guest room's ready. Nina looked immediately at Vincent. Guest room? You're staying here. That wasn't part of the proposal. Your apartment exploded. That doesn't mean I move into a mafia mansion. Vincent stepped closer, lowering his voice enough that only she could hear. You walked into my dining room asking for my name because you believed it would keep you alive. Don't start pretending pride matters more than survival now. The words hit because part of her knew he was right. Mama Ruth sighed softly. Baby, arguing with that man after midnight is like arguing with weather. It changes nothing and ruins your evening. Elijah nodded while opening one of the diner bags. She's right. Last week he stared at a city councilman until the poor man approved 3 construction permits. I heard that, Vincent said. You were supposed to. For the first time all night, Nina saw something shift at the corner of Vincent's mouth. Small, brief, human. Then his phone vibrated. He checked the screen and the softness disappeared instantly. What is it? Mama Ruth asked. Vincent's gaze lifted slowly toward Nina. Somebody accessed Daniel Brooks's old case file tonight. Nina stared at Vincent across the foyer while rain continued hitting the tall windows behind him. What do you mean somebody accessed my father's file? Vincent checked the message again before sliding the phone back into his pocket. 3 minutes ago, somebody entered the records archive at Beaumont Shipping and opened Daniel Brooks' investigation file. Elijah, Mama Ruth said quietly, lock the east entrance. Elijah's expression lost its humor immediately. Already done. Nina felt exhaustion mixing dangerously with adrenaline now. Her apartment was gone. Her father's name had suddenly become important to people willing to bomb buildings, and somehow she was standing barefoot inside a mansion owned by a man half the city feared. Vincent looked at her carefully. "Did your father leave you anything?" "No." That answer came fast. "Because it's true." He studied her another second, then turned toward Elijah. "Double security tonight. Nobody enters this property without my approval." Elijah nodded once and disappeared down the hallway with the easy speed of somebody used to dangerous instructions. Mama Ruth touched Nina's arm gently. "Come eat something before your body forgets how." Nina followed her through the kitchen, mostly because her legs had started shaking without permission. Beaumont Estate looked different away from the ballroom and marble staircases. The kitchen carried warmth instead of power. Copper pots hung above the stove. Cornbread cooled beneath towels on the counter. Somebody had left old blues music playing softly near the sink. Mama Ruth sat Nina at the long wooden table and pushed a bowl of shrimp gumbo toward her. "Eat. I'm not really hungry." "That's trauma talking. Ignore it." Nina managed 2 bites before Vincent entered the kitchen again. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled his sleeves once. Somehow that looked more dangerous than the expensive tailoring. Mama Ruth pointed a wooden spoon at him. "You too." "I'm fine." That wasn't a request. For a second, Nina expected him to ignore her. Instead, Vincent pulled out a chair across from Nina and sat down without argument. "Interesting." Mama Ruth noticed Nina noticing. "Don't look so surprised," she said while pouring coffee. "That man still fears me more than federal prison." Vincent took the coffee without complaint. "You exaggerate. I raised you after your father drank himself into an early grave. I earned the right to exaggerate." Nina glanced up at Vincent automatically. He gave no visible reaction, but something tightened briefly around his eyes. The kitchen settled into quieter conversation after that. Rain, coffee, distant thunder over the lake. For the first time since the explosion, Nina's breathing slowed enough for her thoughts to catch up with her fear. "Why would somebody access my father's file tonight?" she asked finally. Vincent rested his coffee cup against the table. "Because they know you spoke to me. You think somebody inside your company is watching you. I know they are." The honesty in that answer bothered her more than denial would have. Mama Ruth sat beside Nina with a tired sigh. "Daniel Brooks was a decent man. Too decent for doc business." Nina looked at her immediately. "You knew my father too?" "Everybody knew him. Quiet man. Brought me pecans every Christmas because he heard me mention once that I missed Georgia." She shook her head slowly. "People like your daddy believe rules still matter when enough money enters a room. That belief gets expensive." Vincent's phone buzzed again. He read the message and stood immediately. "Elijah found the security footage," he said. "I'll be in the office." Nina rose before thinking. "I'm coming too." "No, my father's involved." "Exactly." Anger pushed through exhaustion now. "You don't get to decide what I can handle." Vincent looked at her steadily. "And you don't understand what kind of people you're standing near yet." The kitchen went quiet. Mama Ruth watched both of them over the rim of her coffee cup like somebody observing weather move toward a storm. Nina folded her arms. "Then explain it." Vincent walked closer until only the table separated them. "Your apartment explosion wasn't random. Accessing your father's file tonight wasn't random either. Somebody is trying to figure out whether Daniel Brooks told you something before he died." "He didn't." Maybe they don't believe that. The truth settled heavily in her chest because she suddenly remembered something she had not thought about in years. 3 nights before his death, her father came home late carrying a locked metal box. He had hidden it somewhere inside their apartment while believing she slept on the couch. Nina never saw the box again after the fire. Vincent noticed the shift in her face instantly. "What?" "Nothing." That looked like something. She hated how observant he was. Before she could answer, Elijah returned carrying a tablet. "Got the footage." Vincent took it from him. Nina moved automatically to look over his shoulder. The screen showed the archive hallway inside Beaumont Shipping. Grainy black and white security footage. Empty corridor. Midnight timestamp. Then a man appeared wearing a maintenance uniform and baseball cap pulled low. Nina froze. "I know him." Vincent's eyes lifted immediately toward her. "From where?" "He used to work loading cargo near Pier 9 when my father was alive." She leaned closer to the screen. "Name's Marcus Reed. At least that's what people called him." Elijah frowned. "Reed's been dead 6 years." The room cooled around that sentence. Nina looked back at the footage. "That's him." Vincent replayed the clip slowly. The man entered the archive using a security key card, stayed inside exactly 4 minutes, then disappeared from camera range before the footage glitched into static. Elijah, Vincent said quietly, trace every employee connected to Pier 9 between 2018 and now. Already started. Vincent handed the tablet back without taking his eyes off Nina. Tell me everything your father said before he died. I already told you. Nothing. You're lying now. Her temper snapped faster than expected. Maybe I just don't trust you. Something dark crossed his expression, not anger exactly. Recognition, maybe. Like he understood distrust too well to take offense from it. You should be careful with secrets in this house, he said calmly. Secrets tend to become expensive here. Nina stared back at him. You say that like you invented expensive secrets. Elijah quietly muttered, well, this is getting personal. Mama Ruth smacked his shoulder with a dish towel without looking at him. Vincent ignored both of them. Go upstairs and sleep for a few hours. You think I can sleep tonight? No, he admitted, but exhaustion makes people careless. Nina wanted to argue again. Instead, she realized her body already felt half numb from stress and smoke and fear. Mama Ruth touched her shoulder gently and guided her toward the staircase. The guest room overlooked the lake. Large bed, soft yellow lighting, fresh clothes folded neatly across a chair. Somebody had even placed cocoa butter lotion beside the bathroom sink, which told Nina Mama Ruth noticed details most people missed. That woman runs this house, Elijah said from the doorway. Vincent just pays the bills. Nina almost smiled faintly. Does everybody here joke during crises? Only the ones trying not to lose their minds. He started leaving, then paused. For what it's worth, Vincent doesn't bring people here often. That's comforting. No, Elijah admitted. Honestly, it's worse. After he left, Nina locked the bedroom door out of instinct. She showered quickly, changed clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at rain moving across the windows. Too many things no longer made sense. Her father, the docks, Vincent Beaumont knowing more than he admitted, a dead dock worker appearing on security footage. Then she remembered the metal box again. Slowly, Nina stood and crossed toward the old duffel bag Elijah had rescued from the damaged apartment building earlier that night. Most of her belongings were ruined, but inside one hidden pocket sewn beneath the lining, her fingers finally touched folded paper. Her heartbeat stopped. Nina pulled out a yellowed envelope she had not seen since the week of her father's funeral. On the front, written in Daniel Brooks' careful handwriting, were 5 words. If anything happens, trust nobody. A second line sat underneath. Not even Beaumont. Nina read the last line 3 times before lowering the envelope slowly back into her lap. Not even Beaumont. Rain continued tapping softly against the guest room windows, while Beaumont Estates settled into the uneasy silence large houses carried after midnight. Somewhere downstairs, a door closed. Footsteps crossed marble floors. Then quiet again. Nina stared at her father's handwriting until old memories started pressing upward, whether she wanted them or not. Daniel Brooks had not been a dramatic man. He paid bills early, fixed broken shelves without being asked, and believed church shoes should always stay polished no matter how hard the week had been. The idea that he had written those words before dying made something cold move through her chest. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Nina? Mama Ruth's voice came through the door. You awake? Nina slid the envelope back beneath the bag lining before opening the door halfway. Mama Ruth stood holding a tray with tea and buttered toast. Couldn't sleep either, she said gently. Nina stepped aside to let her in. You don't have to keep taking care of me. Yes, I do. Mama Ruth placed the tray near the window. That's how decent people survive ugly times. They feed each other. The older woman glanced briefly toward the bag on the bed but asked no questions. Nina appreciated that more than sympathy. You knew my father well? Nina asked quietly. Mama Ruth sat in the armchair beside the lamp, well enough to know he worried too much and smiled too little. A faint smile touched her face. That man loved you hard, though. Used to carry your school pictures folded in his wallet until the edges turned white. Nina looked down at her hands. He ever talk about Vincent? Mama Ruth asked carefully. Not much. That's probably smart. Nina exhaled faintly through her nose. Everybody says things like that around him. Nobody actually explains anything. Mama Ruth folded her hands together. Vincent grew up around men who treated kindness like weakness. His father built Beaumont Shipping by making sure people feared him before they respected him. That kind of upbringing leaves marks. That doesn't explain why my father warned me not to trust him. The room went still after that. Mama Ruth looked at Nina for a long moment. Your daddy wrote that? Nina regretted speaking immediately. Too late now. He left me something before he died, she admitted. A note. Mama Ruth's expression tightened slightly, not with surprise, with concern. You tell Vincent? No. Good. That answer came fast enough to unsettle Nina. Mama Ruth stood slowly and crossed toward the rain-dark window. There are two versions of Vincent Beaumont. The man newspapers write about, and the boy I watched grow into him. I trust one more than the other, depending on the day. That's not comforting. No, Mama Ruth admitted softly. It isn't. Before Nina could ask anything else, shouting rose downstairs. Male voices, fast movement. Mama Ruth turned immediately toward the hallway. Stay here. Nina ignored that instruction within 5 seconds. By the time she reached the second-floor landing, Elijah was already moving through the foyer with a handgun tucked low beside his leg while Vincent stood near the front entrance, speaking sharply into his phone. What happened? Nina asked. Vincent looked up instantly. Why are you downstairs? That's not an answer, Elijah muttered under his breath. You brought home the only woman in Louisiana who talks to you like equal opportunity employment. Vincent ignored him. One of our dock accountants is missing. Nina felt her stomach tighten. Connected to my father? We don't know yet. But you think so? Yes. The honesty landed harder now because she no longer trusted any version of him completely. Vincent ended the phone call and grabbed his coat from the chair near the staircase. I'm going to the port. At 2 in the morning? That's usually when criminals start disappointing me. Nina crossed her arms. I'm coming. No. You keep saying that. Because I mean it. The argument sat between them for half a second before another voice entered quietly from the doorway. She should go. Everyone turned. Marcus Hale stepped inside, carrying Rain across the marble floor with him. Mid-40s. Gray at the temples. Tailored coat. Calm eyes that measured rooms quickly without seeming rude about it. Nina recognized him immediately from Beaumont charity events and newspaper photographs standing beside Vincent at fundraisers. Marcus looked like the kind of man banks trusted instinctively. That made Nina dislike him immediately. Vincent's expression hardened slightly. Explain. If somebody's targeting Daniel Brooks' connections, they already know Nina's here. Marcus removed his gloves carefully. Leaving her behind only makes this house another target. Elijah frowned. He's got a point. Vincent clearly disliked hearing that. Marcus turned toward Nina politely. Miss Brooks. Nina. His smile remained controlled. Vincent rarely brings strangers into family matters. You must have made an impression. She proposed marriage at dinner. Elijah offered helpfully. Marcus blinked once. I'm sorry. Vincent walked toward the door before the conversation could continue. We're wasting time. The ride to Beaumont Shipping felt colder than the earlier drive downtown. Marcus sat beside Vincent in the front while Nina and Elijah took the back seat. Rain blurred the industrial district into shadows and sodium lights, while cargo cranes rose over the docks like giant steel skeletons against the river. Nina watched Vincent carefully from the back seat. He spoke little, but the atmosphere around him had changed since leaving the mansion. Sharper now. More dangerous. Like Beaumont Shipping belonged to a different version of him than the one drinking coffee in Mama Ruth's kitchen earlier. You trust Marcus? She asked quietly to Elijah. Elijah glanced toward the front before answering. Long as I've worked here, Vincent has. That's not what I asked. Elijah rested his arm against the window. Around the docks, trust usually means somebody hasn't betrayed you yet. Not comforting either. The shipping offices sat near Pier 9 beneath floodlights and armed security. Workers moved quickly through the rain while forklifts carried steel containers toward cargo ships waiting in the dark water. Inside the main building, tension hit immediately. Phones ringing. Men arguing, computer screens glowing across open office spaces. Vincent walked through it all without slowing. An older accountant hurried toward them, holding folders tightly against his chest. Mr. Beaumont, we checked the archive access logs again. Somebody used internal clearance. Whose? The accountant hesitated. Vincent stopped walking. Whose clearance? He repeated. Marcus Hale's. The hallway went silent. Nina looked automatically toward Marcus. He looked genuinely confused. That's impossible, Marcus said calmly. My security card never left the estate tonight. Vincent held his gaze for several seconds. Not emotional, calculating. Then he extended his hand. Card. Marcus handed it over immediately. Vincent passed it to Elijah. Verify the timestamp. Elijah disappeared toward the security office. Nobody spoke while rain battered the warehouse windows nearby. Nina noticed several employees pretending not to watch the exchange. Marcus loosened his tie slightly. You think I accessed the archive myself? I think somebody used your clearance. That's not the same thing. Vincent's expression remained unreadable. No, it isn't. Nina suddenly understood something important about powerful men. They rarely shouted during dangerous moments. Real power became quieter the closer it moved toward violence. Elijah returned 3 minutes later holding the security tablet. The card wasn't cloned. Marcus frowned. Meaning? Meaning your actual security card entered the archive tonight. The silence afterward felt heavier than anger. Marcus looked directly at Vincent. You know I didn't do this. Vincent answered calmly. I know somebody wants me questioning people close to me. Nina thought suddenly about the note hidden inside her bag upstairs. Not even Beaumont. Then the warehouse lights flickered once. Everybody noticed. Elijah reached instinctively for his weapon. A second later, one of the dock windows exploded inward. The gunshot came half a second after the window exploded. Glass burst across the office floor while everybody moved at once. Elijah grabbed Nina hard around the waist and pulled her behind a steel filing cabinet before she fully understood what was happening. Another shot slammed into the far wall where Vincent had been standing moments earlier. Sniper, Elijah muttered. Outside, dock alarms started screaming across the rain-soaked shipping yard. Marcus ducked behind a support pillar while security officers flooded the hallway with drawn weapons. Vincent remained standing for one dangerous second longer than everybody else, watching the broken warehouse window with cold concentration before finally crouching behind a desk. South building, he said sharply. 3rd level. 2 guards ran immediately toward the loading docks. Nina's pulse hammered so hard she could barely hear herself think. Glass glittered across the floor around them while rain blew sideways through the shattered window. Elijah checked her quickly. You hit? No. Good. Stay down. Another shot cracked through the warehouse. Metal sparked somewhere overhead. Vincent pulled a handgun from beneath his coat with the smoothness of somebody who had spent years expecting violence before breakfast. He glanced toward Marcus. You still think tonight's coincidence? Marcus looked furious now instead of polished. Somebody's trying to split your house apart. They're doing a decent job. The lights flickered again before emergency generators kicked in. Red backup lighting washed across the warehouse offices, turning everybody's faces harder. Nina looked toward Vincent. They're not trying to kill you. His eyes moved to her instantly. They're trying to scare you into trusting the wrong person, she continued. First my apartment, then the file, now this. Marcus studied her carefully. That's a sharp observation. My father taught me to pay attention before speaking. Something unreadable crossed Vincent's face at the mention of Daniel Brooks. A security guard rushed into the office breathing heavily. Shooters gone. Vehicle waiting near the south gate. Vincent stood immediately. Alive? Driver escaped. We found this inside the car. The guard handed over a manila envelope. Vincent opened it carefully while Elijah kept Nina low behind the cabinet. Inside sat a single photograph. Vincent stared at it without speaking. Marcus moved closer. What is it? Vincent handed him the photo. Marcus's expression changed slightly for the first time that night. Nina stood despite Elijah trying to stop her. Show me. Vincent hesitated only a second before passing her the photograph. It showed Daniel Brooks standing beside a cargo container at Pier 9 6 years earlier. Beside him stood a younger Vincent Beaumont. Both men looked angry. On the back, written in black marker, he should have told you the truth. Nina looked up slowly. You lied to me. Vincent's jaw tightened. About what? You said my father worked for you. That picture says he worked with you. Those are different things. Not to daughters. The room stayed quiet except for rain and distant alarms from the docks below. Marcus folded his arms. Maybe we should continue this conversation somewhere less exposed. Vincent kept his eyes on Nina another moment before nodding once. We're leaving. The convoy back to Beaumont Estate doubled in size. Black SUVs moved through wet New Orleans streets, while armed security vehicles followed behind them. Nina sat beside Vincent this time instead of Elijah. Neither spoke for most of the drive. The photograph rested between them on the center console. Finally, Nina asked, What was my father involved in? Vincent stared through the windshield. Your father audited cargo manifests at Pier 9. That doesn't explain why someone's shooting at us. Because Daniel Brooks discovered shipments moving through Beaumont shipping that weren't supposed to exist. Nina turned toward him fully now. Human trafficking? Vincent glanced at her briefly. You figured that out fast. My father volunteered weekends at missing persons shelters after Hurricane Katrina. He used to say ports were where desperate people disappeared easiest. Vincent's hands tightened slightly around the steering wheel. What did he find? She pressed. Containers moving through customs without inspection, women transferred between private cargo routes. His voice remained steady, but something colder entered it now. Your father brought evidence to me instead of federal agents. Why? Because federal agents were already getting paid. That answer felt believable enough to make her sick. And you stopped it? I tried. Tried. Not succeeded. Nina looked back toward the rain outside. My father trusted you. Yes. You keep saying things like they should comfort me. Vincent parked briefly at a red light before answering. Comfort hasn't been part of my life for a long time. The words came out simple, no self-pity attached. Somehow that made them heavier. Back at Beaumont Estate, Mama Ruth was waiting in the foyer wearing slippers and holding a shotgun. Nina blinked. Is that loaded? Mama Ruth looked offended. Child, I grew up in Alabama. Of course it's loaded. Even Vincent rubbed a hand briefly across his forehead. Ruth. What? Somebody shot at my house. It's not your house. That's where you're wrong. Elijah nearly choked, trying not to laugh while taking the shotgun gently from her hands. Within minutes, the estate shifted into lockdown. Security checked windows, gates sealed, phones rang downstairs continuously. Nina stood near the library entrance, watching men move through the mansion with controlled urgency. Wealthy houses always looked different during crisis. Less elegant. More honest. Vincent entered the library carrying the photograph and 2 glasses of bourbon. He handed one toward her. I don't drink bourbon. You might tonight. She accepted it anyway. The library smelled like cedar shelves and old paper. Rain tapped softly against the windows, while fireplace light moved across dark wood walls. Vincent loosened his tie slightly before sitting near the fire. Nina remained standing. You owe me the truth, she said. Yes. But truth usually creates more problems than lies. That sounds like something rich men teach their sons. His eyes lifted toward her. No. Rich men teach sons how to survive consequences. Truth usually arrives later. She hated that part of her understood what he meant. Vincent placed the photograph on the low table between them. Your father came to me 6 years ago because he discovered unauthorized shipments moving through Pier 9. Women. Teenagers sometimes. His voice flattened slightly. Some already dead by the time containers reached the Gulf. Nina felt nausea rise hard inside her chest. He thought you could stop it. He believed I still cared about what happened around my company. And did you? Vincent held her gaze steadily. Yes. The answer came too fast to sound rehearsed. Nina sat slowly across from him. Then why didn't he go public? Because the people funding those shipments included judges, politicians, and federal contractors. Vincent leaned back slightly. Your father believed if the wrong people learned what he knew before he had enough proof, he'd disappear. And he was right. Silence settled heavily between them. The fire cracked softly in the corner while rain continued over the lake outside. Finally, Nina asked the question that mattered most. Did you love your wife? Vincent looked genuinely surprised by it. What? You wear the ring still. Nina nodded toward his hand wrapped loosely around the bourbon glass. People don't keep wedding rings after funerals unless grief still owns part of them. For the first time since she met him, Vincent looked tired instead of dangerous. Yes, he said quietly. I loved her. What happened? His jaw shifted once before he answered. She started asking questions about Pier 9 too. Nina stared at Vincent across the library while the fire cracked softly between them. Your wife died because she investigated the port? Vincent rested the bourbon glass against his knee without drinking. Officially, Eleanor Beaumont died in a boating accident during a storm. And unofficially, she found something she wasn't supposed to find. The answer settled heavily in the room. Nina thought about the way wealthy families in New Orleans buried scandals beneath charity galas and old church donations. Money polished grief until it looked respectable from far away. She trusted the wrong people? Nina asked quietly. Vincent looked toward the fire instead of her. No, she trusted the right people too late. Something in the way he said it made Nina stop pushing. For the first time since entering Beaumont Estate, she saw exhaustion underneath his control. Not weakness, just a man carrying too many dead names inside his head. Before either could speak again, the library doors opened hard enough to make both of them look up. Elijah entered breathing unevenly. "We've got a problem." Vincent stood immediately. "What happened?" "Mama Ruth's gone." The room turned cold. Nina set the bourbon glass down too fast. "What do you mean gone?" Elijah ran a hand across the back of his neck. "Kitchen staff said she stepped outside 10 minutes ago after getting a phone call. Security cameras lost her near the greenhouse." Vincent moved past him instantly. Nina followed before anyone could stop her. The estate no longer felt warm. Hallway lights reflected sharply across marble floors while security teams moved through rooms speaking low into radios. By the time they reached the greenhouse entrance, rain had started again over the lake. One guard stood near the broken security camera mounted above the side door. Vincent's voice dropped dangerously low. "How long has this been dead?" "Maybe 15 minutes, sir." Vincent looked at the shattered camera once before turning toward Elijah. "Lock every gate." "Already done." Nina scanned the dark gardens beyond the greenhouse windows. She wouldn't just disappear. "No," Vincent agreed quietly. "She wouldn't." A phone vibrated somewhere. Everyone froze. The sound came from the gardening table beside the greenhouse sink. Mama Ruth's phone lay there vibrating against wet soil and scattered pruning shears. Vincent picked it up. One unread message filled the screen. "Check the docks." Nina felt dread settle deep in her stomach. "It's a trap." "Yes." "Then don't go." Vincent lifted his eyes toward her slowly. "I don't leave people behind." The answer came so simply it made her angry. "People keep dying around this port," she snapped. "Your wife. My father. Now, Mama Ruth. And you think walking away changes that?" The question hit harder because she had no answer ready. Marcus appeared from the hallway moments later, coat half-buttoned, expression tight. "I just spoke to Harbor Security. Pier 9's lights were manually shut down 20 minutes ago." Vincent grabbed his gun from the nearby console table. "Get the cars." Elijah hesitated. "You sure this isn't exactly what they want?" "Yes," Vincent said calmly. "That's why we're going." The convoy reached the docks in under 15 minutes. Rain swept sideways across the empty shipping yard while cranes stood motionless over black water. Half the floodlights remained dead, leaving sections of the port buried in darkness. Nina stayed close behind Vincent as they crossed between stacked cargo containers. Armed guards spread through the yard silently. "Elijah," Vincent said quietly. "East side." Marcus moved toward the loading warehouse while Vincent continued toward Pier 9 with Nina beside him. "You really should have left me at the house," she muttered. "You really should have proposed to somebody less complicated." Despite everything, a short breath escaped her that almost resembled laughter. Then they heard it, a woman screaming. Vincent moved immediately toward the sound. The old loading warehouse near Pier 9 stood partially open, rain blowing through the broken side entrance. Inside, one hanging work light swung slowly above rows of shipping crates. Mama Ruth sat tied to a chair near the center of the room. Nina rushed forward instinctively before Vincent grabbed her arm hard enough to stop her. "Wait." Too late. The warehouse lights exploded on all at once. Men stepped out from behind cargo stacks with rifles raised. At least 8. Vincent pulled Nina behind a steel container as gunfire tore through the warehouse. The sound became deafening inside the metal walls. Elijah and the security team stormed through the opposite entrance, firing back while Marcus dragged Mama Ruth's chair sideways behind cover. Nina crouched beside Vincent with her pulse pounding violently in her throat. "You okay?" he asked without looking at her. "You ask that during gunfights?" "Yes." "That feels emotionally confusing." One shot struck the steel container inches above them. Vincent leaned sideways and fired twice with controlled precision. Somewhere across the warehouse, a man dropped hard against the concrete floor. Nina stared at him. Not the shooting, the calmness. Violence moved naturally around Vincent Beaumont, not because he enjoyed it, because he had survived inside it too long. "Mama Ruth?" Elijah shouted from across the warehouse. "I'm alive," she yelled back furiously, "and somebody better untie me before my knees file complaints." Even Vincent almost smiled at that. Then another gunshot cracked sharply from the upper catwalk. Vincent shoved Nina down just before the bullet shattered the container behind her head. This time she felt his body cover hers completely. Heavy, warm, protective in a way that arrived too instinctively to be calculated. For half a second, neither moved. Then Vincent lifted his head sharply toward the catwalk. Sniper. Marcus fired upward while Elijah circled left through the crates. Nina grabbed Vincent's sleeve before he could move. Don't. His eyes met hers immediately. That's what they want, she said. To separate you. Something flickered briefly across his face. Surprise, maybe. Then, understanding. Before he could answer, a voice echoed from the warehouse speakers overhead. Still saving people, Vincent? Everybody froze. The voice sounded distorted electronically, but old enough to carry confidence instead of panic. Vincent stood slowly from behind cover. Show yourself. A low laugh crackled through the speakers. That's the problem with men like you, the voice continued. You keep believing loyalty matters after power already bought everybody. Nina saw Vincent's jaw tighten slightly. The voice continued. Daniel Brooks believed in loyalty too. Eleanor Beaumont believed in it. Look where that got them. Rage crossed Vincent's face fast enough to feel dangerous. You touch Ruth again, he said quietly. And I'll burn every dock between here and Houston finding you. Another laugh echoed overhead. There he is. Then silence. The warehouse lights suddenly shut off again. Complete darkness swallowed the room. Gunfire erupted instantly. Nina ducked lower beside the container while footsteps thundered through the warehouse. Men shouted. Metal crashed somewhere nearby. Then a hand grabbed Nina violently from behind. She screamed automatically as somebody dragged her backward through the dark. Vincent turned at the sound of her voice. Nina. She reached toward him instinctively just before another shot exploded between them. Vincent fired back immediately, but darkness and moving bodies swallowed everything into chaos. The last thing Nina saw before a hood dropped over her face was Vincent Beaumont pushing through gunfire toward her with the kind of fury that no longer looked controlled at all. Nina woke with pain in the back of her head and the taste of blood at the corner of her mouth. For several seconds she could hear only dripping water and the distant groan of old wood shifting somewhere above her. Then the smell reached her. Dust, mold, burned candle wax, church. She opened her eyes slowly. Moonlight filtered through broken stained glass windows high above the room, washing pale color across cracked wooden pews and collapsed sections of ceiling. The place looked abandoned for years. Rain tapped softly against the old roof while one weak lantern burned near the altar. Her wrists were tied to a chair. Nina tested the ropes once without panic. Tight, professional. A voice echoed calmly through the darkness. Good. I was getting tired of waiting. She looked up immediately. Marcus Hale stepped out from the shadows near the altar wearing the same rain-dark coat from the docks. Calm, clean, controlled. No mask now. For a second, Nina simply stared at him. You. Marcus gave a small nod. That usually happens when people finally understand things. Anger hit harder than fear. You kidnapped me? I saved you from Vincent Beaumont's version of protection. You had people shooting at us. Yes. And Mama Ruth? Alive. Annoyed. Probably insulting everybody in that warehouse by now. Nina pulled harder against the ropes. You could have gotten people killed. Marcus walked slowly down the center aisle between the pews. People are already dead, Nina. Your father. Eleanor Beaumont. 3 federal witnesses over the last 4 years. He stopped in front of her. The mistake you're making is believing Vincent stood outside that system. He tried to stop it. Marcus watched her carefully after that sentence. That's what he told you? He didn't deny the trafficking. No. Vincent rarely lies directly. Marcus crouched slightly in front of her chair. That's what makes him convincing. Nina stared back at him. Then tell me why you're really doing this. Marcus reached into his coat and removed a folder thick with old documents. He dropped it into her lap. Because Daniel Brooks trusted the wrong man. Nina looked down slowly. Shipping manifests, financial transfers, dock schedules. Every signature at the bottom carried the same name. Vincent Beaumont. Her chest tightened. Marcus watched her reaction quietly. Pier 9 operated for years under Vincent's authority. Nobody moved human cargo through Louisiana without Beaumont protection. He said he tried to shut it down. He tried after Eleanor discovered it. Marcus straightened slowly. There's a difference. Nina wanted to reject everything immediately. Instead, she remembered Vincent's answers from the library. Careful, incomplete, never fully innocent. Marcus walked toward the shattered stained glass window overlooking swamp water beyond the church grounds. Do you know what power does to people after 20 years? He asked quietly. It convinces them survival matters more than morality. Men like Vincent stop asking whether something is right. They ask whether something is manageable. Nina looked down at the documents again. One paper caught her attention immediately. Daniel Brooks's name. Witness recommendation denied. Signed, V. Beaumont. Her stomach turned. Marcus noticed. Your father begged Vincent for protection after discovering the trafficking routes. Vincent refused because exposure would have destroyed Beaumont shipping. No, I watched the meeting myself. Nina closed her eyes briefly. Some people survive by becoming hard. Others survive by staying kind. Mama Ruth's words suddenly hurt differently now. What do you want from me? Nina asked quietly. Marcus looked toward the altar for a moment before answering. There's a gala tomorrow night at Beaumont Ballroom. Politicians, judges, investors. Everybody connected to Pier 9 will be there. His eyes returned to her. I want Vincent exposed publicly before he buries this again. And if I refuse? Marcus smiled faintly. You won't. You sound confident. Because unlike Vincent, I knew your father well. Marcus folded his hands calmly. Daniel Brooks spent his last year alive trying to save women nobody important cared about. You inherited that from him. Before Nina could answer, footsteps echoed somewhere above the church ceiling. Marcus looked upward instantly. One of his men hurried down the staircase from the bell tower. He's here. Marcus sighed softly. Of course he is. Gunfire exploded outside the church less than 2 seconds later. Nina's pulse jumped hard as headlights swept through broken windows. Men shouted outside. Tires skidded across wet gravel. Marcus pulled a handgun smoothly from beneath his coat. You brought him directly to me, Nina snapped. No, Marcus said calmly. Vincent found us because he's predictable where you're concerned. Another burst of gunfire tore through the church entrance. Wood splintered. Marcus's men moved quickly into defensive positions while he stepped behind one of the stone pillars near the altar. Nina, he said without looking back at her. If Vincent reaches you first tonight, ask him one question. Outside, Vincent's voice thundered through the church. Marcus, Nina had never heard him sound like that before. Not controlled. Furious. Marcus looked almost amused. Ask him why Daniel Brooks died 2 days after meeting with him. Then Vincent and Elijah stormed through the front entrance with armed security behind them. Chaos erupted instantly. Gunfire cracked through the old church while stained glass shattered overhead. Marcus's men fired from the balcony level while Elijah returned shots from behind overturned pews. Vincent saw Nina immediately. Everything else disappeared from his attention after that. He crossed the church toward her through flying splinters and gunfire with terrifying focus. Get down, Elijah shouted. Vincent ignored him. One bullet struck the wall inches beside Nina's chair. Stone fragments cut across her cheek. Then Vincent reached her. His hands moved quickly over the ropes, binding her wrists. Are you hurt? Before she could answer, Marcus spoke from behind the altar. Ask him. Vincent froze slightly. Nina looked up at him. Did my father meet you before he died? Silence. Not long, but long enough. Vincent cut the final rope loose. Yes. Did he ask for protection? Another gunshot echoed through the church. Vincent grabbed her shoulder, pulling her behind the overturned pew as bullets shattered the candles above the altar. Nina, answer me. His jaw tightened. Yes. The truth hit harder than shouting would have. Marcus laughed bitterly from across the church. There it is. Nina stared at Vincent while gunfire continued around them. What did you do? Vincent's eyes locked on hers. I told him I needed more time. And 2 days later he died. Pain crossed Vincent's face fast enough to look real. Yes. For one dangerous second she could not breathe. Not because Marcus had been right. Because Vincent looked like a man who had already punished himself for it every day since. Elijah fired upward toward the balcony. We need to move now. Marcus backed slowly toward the side chapel exit while his remaining men covered him. This city doesn't belong to good men anymore, Vincent, he called out. That's why people like Daniel Brooks always die first. Vincent raised his gun toward him. Marcus smiled faintly. You still won't shoot me in a church. Then the side door slammed open behind him and he disappeared into the storm outside. The gunfire stopped almost immediately after. Rain and breathing filled the silence left behind. Nina remained crouched beside the pew while Vincent stood over her, chest rising heavily. You should have told me, she said quietly. Yes. Why didn't you? Vincent looked toward the broken altar before answering. Because some truths arrive too late to fix anything. Outside, police sirens finally began approaching through the storm. Inside the ruined church, Nina realized something far more dangerous than fear had started growing between them. She no longer knew which man she should trust, and that uncertainty hurt more than the kidnapping ever did. By the time they returned to Beaumont Estate, dawn had already started bleeding pale gray across the Louisiana sky. Nobody spoke during the drive back from the church. Elijah sat in the front passenger seat with blood on his sleeve from a bullet graze he refused to treat seriously, while Vincent drove with both hands tight around the steering wheel and Nina stared silently out the window at empty streets washed silver by rain. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt wounded. When the gates opened, Mama Ruth was waiting on the front steps wearing a heavy robe and holding a cigarette she clearly wasn't smoking correctly. The second Nina stepped out of the SUV, Mama Ruth wrapped both arms around her hard enough to make Nina finally breathe again. "You keep disappearing and aging me," the older woman muttered into her shoulder. "I'm okay. That's becoming less believable every day." Elijah climbed out next, wincing slightly. Mama Ruth pointed immediately at the blood on his sleeve. "You got shot? It barely counts." That's exactly what foolish men say before infections. Vincent walked past all of them without speaking and disappeared inside the mansion. Nina watched him go. Mama Ruth noticed. "That man's carrying enough guilt to sink a church. He lied to me." "Yes." Mama Ruth sighed softly. "But lying and failing people aren't always the same sin." Nina looked toward the mansion entrance. "My father asked him for help, and Vincent didn't move fast enough." Mama Ruth's voice lowered carefully. "You think he's forgiven himself for that?" The answer sat painfully obvious in Nina's chest. Inside the estate, the atmosphere had shifted again. Security moved through the halls with sharper urgency. Phones rang constantly. News channels played quietly in office rooms downstairs. Whatever happened at the church had accelerated something bigger. Marcus was no longer hiding. Vincent stood alone inside the library when Nina entered 20 minutes later. He had removed his jacket and rolled his sleeves unevenly, something she realized he only did when his control started slipping around the edges. A half-empty glass of bourbon sat near the fireplace beside scattered files and photographs from Pier 9 investigations. He looked up when she entered. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Nina asked, "How many people died because you waited?" Vincent didn't answer right away. "Too many." The honesty hurt worse now. She crossed the room slowly. "Marcus said you protected Beaumont Shipping instead of my father. I protected thousands of employees whose lives depended on that company surviving. That sounds like justification. It sounds like reality." Nina folded her arms tightly. "And my father became acceptable collateral?" Something sharp crossed his expression, then disappeared. "No, but he still died." Vincent stood slowly from the chair. "Do you think I don't know that?" The anger in his voice finally surfaced for the first time since she met him. Not explosive, exhausted. "He came to me with evidence against men connected to senators, federal contractors, judges. I thought if I moved carefully, I could protect him and dismantle the operation without starting a war." Vincent looked directly at her now. "I was wrong." The room stayed quiet except for the low crackle of firewood. Nina wanted to stay angry. It would have been easier. Instead, she saw a man carrying the consequences of one terrible decision for years. Before she could answer, Elijah entered holding a tablet. "We've got movement." Vincent's expression hardened immediately. "Where?" "Marcus sent invitations to tonight's Beaumont Foundation Gala." Nina frowned slightly. "The charity event?" Elijah nodded. "Every major donor, judge, council member, and shipping executive in Louisiana will be there." Vincent understood before Nina did. "He's gathering everybody connected to Pier 9 in one room," he said quietly. Elijah handed over the tablet. "And local media got anonymous tips this morning about Beaumont Shipping corruption." Nina felt the pieces locking together now. "Marcus wants a public collapse." "No," Vincent said coldly. "He wants control after the collapse." The realization settled heavily over the room. Marcus had spent years beside Vincent learning how power moved through New Orleans. If Beaumont fell publicly tonight, Marcus could position himself as the man exposing corruption instead of participating in it. "Elijah," Vincent said, "contact federal prosecutors directly. No intermediaries." "Already trying." "Trying?" They stopped answering an hour ago. Vincent's face darkened slightly. That means Marcus reached them first. Nina looked between them. Then what do we do? For several seconds, nobody answered. Then Vincent looked at her. We finished this publicly. The ballroom that evening looked almost identical to the one where Nina first placed the cheap silver ring in front of Vincent Beaumont. Crystal chandeliers glowed above polished marble floors while jazz music drifted softly through conversations worth millions of dollars. Politicians smiled for cameras. Wealthy donors drank bourbon beside paintings older than Louisiana itself. And beneath all of it sat fear. Nina felt it immediately. People watched Vincent too carefully tonight. Smiles lingered too long. Conversations stopped when he approached. Everybody knew something was coming. Mama Ruth adjusted Nina's black evening dress gently near the ballroom entrance. You look beautiful. I looked nervous. That too. Nina glanced toward Vincent across the room. He stood near the staircase in a dark suit speaking quietly with Elijah while security teams blended into the crowd around them. Even surrounded by politicians and millionaires, he still looked like the most dangerous person inside the building. Then Marcus arrived. The ballroom shifted almost invisibly at his entrance. Perfect tuxedo, calm expression, confident enough to smile while cameras flashed toward him. Marcus raised a champagne glass toward Vincent from across the room like they were old friends instead of men approaching war. Elijah, Vincent said quietly. Doors locked? Already. Marcus crossed the ballroom slowly until he stood directly before them. Quite a turnout, he said smoothly. Vincent's expression remained unreadable. You enjoy dramatic endings. I enjoy honest ones. Marcus's gaze moved toward Nina. Miss Brooks, I hope Vincent finally explained who profits from men like him surviving. Nina held his gaze steadily now. You mean men like both of you? For the first time that night, Marcus looked genuinely impressed. The ballroom orchestra continued playing softly while wealthy guests pretended not to notice the tension gathering around the three of them. Marcus smiled faintly. Your father would have been proud of that answer. Vincent stepped slightly closer. Careful. Marcus ignored him. Daniel Brooks once told me something interesting. His eyes stayed on Nina. He said corruption survives because decent people keep convincing themselves evil can be managed quietly. Vincent's jaw tightened. And he was right, Marcus continued calmly. Your mistake, Vincent, was believing you could sit beside monsters without eventually feeding them. Nina saw something shift across Vincent's face then. Not denial. Recognition. Before anyone could speak again, every screen inside the ballroom suddenly flickered to black. The music stopped. Guests turned toward the massive projector above the stage as security teams reached instinctively for weapons beneath jackets. Then old shipping footage appeared across the ballroom walls. Cargo containers, P9, women being moved between trucks, federal signatures, payment records, Beaumont shipping logos. The room exploded into shouting. Someone screamed near the back tables. Reporters rushed forward. Politicians started leaving their seats while cameras flashed wildly through the ballroom. Marcus looked toward Vincent calmly amid the chaos. There it is, the truth. Then he pulled a handgun from beneath his jacket and pointed it directly at Nina. The ballroom froze the second Marcus pointed the gun at Nina. Nobody moved. Crystal chandeliers still glowed above a room collapsing in real time while shipping records and trafficking footage continued flashing across giant projection screens. Politicians backed away from cameras. Wealthy donors stared at exits calculating survival faster than morality. Somewhere near the orchestra stage, a woman quietly began crying. Marcus never looked away from Vincent. This, he said calmly, is the problem with men who wait too long to choose sides. Vincent stepped forward once. Put the gun down. You're not really in a position to negotiate tonight. Elijah had already drawn his weapon near the staircase, but too many guests stood between him and Marcus for a clean shot. Security teams shifted through the ballroom carefully, while reporters filmed everything now with trembling hands and hungry eyes. Nina stood perfectly still, not because she wasn't afraid, because she finally understood something about powerful men. Fear excited men like Marcus. Calm unsettled them. Marcus looked toward the giant screens behind him where women's faces continued appearing beside cargo logs and payment records. You spent years convincing yourself you could manage evil quietly, he said to Vincent. That's what weak men do when they enjoy comfort more than consequences. Vincent's voice lowered dangerously. You murdered Daniel Brooks. Marcus smiled faintly. No, I removed a problem after you failed to. The words hit the ballroom harder than the gun. Nina saw it happen in Vincent's face instantly. Not surprise. Confirmation. The last piece locking into place. Marcus continued calmly, almost conversational now. Your wife figured it out before Brooks did, by the way. Eleanor always was smarter than you. That changed something. Not loudly, not dramatically, but Nina saw Vincent Beaumont stop holding himself together. The room felt it too. Elijah muttered quietly under his breath, "Oh, that was a mistake." Marcus noticed too late. Vincent moved before anyone else could react. 1 second he stood beside the staircase. The next he slammed into Marcus hard enough to send both men crashing across the ballroom floor while the gun fired wildly into the ceiling. Guests screamed and scattered as tables overturned and crystals shattered beneath running feet. Elijah immediately grabbed Nina and pulled her behind the marble bar near the orchestra stage. "Stay down." Gunfire exploded somewhere near the entrance. As Marcus's remaining men opened fire trying to reach him, Beaumont's security returned shots instantly. The ballroom transformed from charity gala into war zone within seconds. Nina crouched low behind the bar while people ran past screaming in tuxedos and evening gowns. Above them, the projector screens continued playing evidence nobody could stop now. Vincent and Marcus fought brutally across the ballroom floor between broken chairs and shattered glass. No elegance left. No polished, wealthy masks. Just two men carrying years of betrayal inside their fists. Marcus slammed Vincent into a banquet table hard enough to collapse it. "You still don't get it," he snarled. "Men like us built this city." Vincent hit him back with enough force to send blood across Marcus's mouth. "No," he said coldly. "Men like you poisoned it." Another gunshot cracked through the ballroom. Elijah cursed suddenly beside Nina and grabbed his shoulder. Blood spread quickly across his sleeve. "You're hit." "I noticed." Even injured, Elijah kept firing toward the ballroom entrance where federal agents finally stormed inside shouting commands. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." Nobody listened immediately. Marcus saw the agents entering and understood the same thing Vincent already had. The Empire was finished. He reached suddenly toward the fallen handgun near the broken stage. Nina saw it before Vincent did. "Vincent!" Vincent turned just as Marcus grabbed the weapon and fired. The shot echoed through the ballroom. Then silence hit strangely fast. Vincent staggered backward. Nina's chest stopped. For one terrible second she thought Marcus had shot him. Then Marcus himself collapsed to his knees. Blood spread darkly through his white dress shirt. Behind him stood Mama Ruth holding Elijah's handgun with both hands shaking violently. The entire ballroom stared at the 63-year-old woman in house slippers and a floral shawl. Mama Ruth lowered the gun slowly. "I am too old," she announced breathlessly, "for white men ruining my evening every 5 minutes." Even Elijah laughed once through the pain. Marcus looked up weakly toward Vincent from the ballroom floor. "You think exposing this fixes anything?" Vincent stood over him breathing hard. "No." "Then why do it?" For several seconds Vincent said nothing. Then his eyes shifted toward Nina across the destroyed ballroom. "Because somebody decent finally forced me to look at myself honestly." Marcus followed his gaze toward her and smiled faintly despite the blood at his mouth. "That maid?" he whispered bitterly. "You burned everything down for her?" Vincent answered without hesitation. "She reminded me I still had a soul worth saving." Marcus let out one final broken laugh before federal agents pulled him into handcuffs beside the shattered ballroom stage. Outside, sirens flooded Beaumont Estate from every direction. Inside, nobody important looked powerful anymore. Judges sat trembling beside broken champagne glasses. Politicians avoided cameras while federal agents seized phones and documents. Reporters moved through the wreckage like scavengers smelling history. Nina crossed the ballroom slowly toward Vincent while paramedics treated Elijah near the staircase, and Mama Ruth loudly argued with an FBI agent about firearm permits. Vincent looked exhausted now, not physically, spiritually. "You got shot?" Nina asked quietly. He glanced down toward the blood across his side. "Apparently, that's not a normal answer. Tonight stopped feeling normal hours ago." She looked around the destroyed ballroom. "You think any of this can actually be repaired?" Vincent followed her gaze slowly. "Not completely." The honesty in that answer felt different now, cleaner somehow. Federal agents approached moments later requesting statements, while photographers crowded behind police barricades outside the estate gates. The rest of the night dissolved into interviews, arrests, and headlines already spreading across every news station in Louisiana. By sunrise, Beaumont shipping stock had collapsed. By noon, 3 judges resigned. By evening, Federal investigations reached Washington, and for the first time in years, nobody protected Pier 9 anymore. 3 months later, New Orleans felt quieter, not cleaner. Cities like New Orleans never became clean completely, but quieter. Beaumont Estate no longer carried armed guards at every hallway entrance. The gates remained open during daylight hours. Construction crews repaired damaged sections of the ballroom while lawsuits and investigations continued swallowing the Beaumont name across national television. Vincent accepted most of it without fighting. That surprised people most. Nina spent her mornings restoring the old St. Michael Church outside the city where the kidnapping happened. The parish hired her officially after learning she once studied restoration work before money forced her out of college. She repaired damaged wood, cleaned smoke-darkened paintings, and reopened stained glass windows that had stayed boarded shut for years. Healing old things suited her. One warm Louisiana afternoon, she stood on a ladder carefully restoring gold leaf around the church altar when footsteps echoed softly behind her. She already knew who it was. "You missed a spot," Vincent said. Nina glanced down toward him. "That's because you're distracting me." He looked healthier now. Still dangerous. Still Vincent Beaumont, but something harder around his eyes had finally loosened. The wedding ring was gone from his hand. The silver lighter remained. He held it less often these days. "How's Elijah?" she asked while climbing down carefully. "Annoying again. Doctors say that means recovery." "And Mama Ruth?" She threatened 3 senators before breakfast. "That sounds healthy too." A small smile touched Vincent's face before fading again into something more serious. He reached into his coat pocket slowly. Nina recognized the cheap silver ring immediately. The same one from the ballroom. "I kept it," he said quietly. "You laughed at it. I laugh at lots of things that scare me." That answer felt honest enough to hurt a little. Sunlight moved softly through the restored stained glass windows, while distant church bells echoed outside across the Louisiana afternoon. Vincent looked around the repaired chapel slowly before speaking again. "You know what the strange part is?" "What?" "I spent years trying to protect this city with money and fear." His eyes returned to hers. "Turns out shame accomplished more." Nina folded her arms lightly. "That almost sounded wise." "Don't repeat it. I have a reputation." For the first time in months, silence between them felt peaceful instead of wounded. Then Vincent looked at her carefully and said, "The first time you asked me to marry you, you were trying to survive." Nina smiled faintly. It was still a terrible proposal. It really was. He stepped closer then, holding the cheap silver ring between his fingers. "This time," he said quietly, "stay because you want to." Nina looked at him for a long moment before taking the ring gently from his hand. Outside, the church doors remained open wide against the warm Louisiana light. Sometimes the most dangerous people are not the ones holding guns, but the ones who stay silent while evil grows around them. This story reminds us that power without conscience destroys families, friendships, and entire communities from the inside out. Vincent learned too late that protecting a system built on fear only creates more suffering, while Nina proved that courage does not come from wealth or status, but from refusing to look away when innocent people are hurting. The story also shows that justice is rarely clean or easy, yet one honest person can still force powerful men to face the truth. In the end, love did not save them because it was perfect. It saved them because it taught 2 broken people how to become human again. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.